Duke lost at Wake Forest on Saturday, but the biggest story from Saturday came after the final whistle in Winston-Salem.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a 5 times per week national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. Right now, new customers who join today, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 is a win. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Isaac, another incredibly jam-packed weekend of college basketball excellence. We had Kentucky dropping over 115 points, Khalif Battle dropping 42 points for Arkansas. We had tremendous results all across the country, some huge bubble ramifications. We are going to start with the ACC, and I would love to have been able to start this podcast celebrating Wake Forest's win because they needed this quad one victory badly. They got it. They've likely put themselves in a much, much more comfortable position being in the NCAA tournament. It's a great story. Steve Forbes has done phenomenal navigating the transfer portal. And I wish that could be more the focus. But unfortunately, the focus for this show and the focus all around college basketball the last couple of days has been what happened right after the whistle blew to end the game between Duke and Wake Forest. Frankly, it happened right before the whistle blew, which is part of the problem, is that Wake Forest students were allowed to storm onto the court with very little preventing them from getting right onto the floor as the final whistle was happening, giving Duke players zero opportunity to get off the floor. There was an incident with Kyle Filipowski getting ran over. People have tried to determine what they think happened by slowing down video and watching it. It's kind of just been a whole messy thing, but ultimately it has been a part of a longer narrative that has been going on throughout the season about court storms. And basically, to me, it kind of goes hand in hand with the narrative that we've talked about this season, which is ranked teams going on the road and losing to unranked opponents. It has happened more from a rate perspective than ever before this season. And of course, that's going to lead to more court storms. Most of the time when a team storms the court, it is because they were an unranked team that beat a ranked team at their home floor. So it makes sense that we're seeing more of these. Unfortunately, this one was yet another one where the players were not able to get off the floor safely. Filipowski got hurt in this one. And whether you think he intentionally did something or not, which I'm here to tell you right now, folks, he did not. He was not pushing people. He was trying to get out of the way. It did not look to me in any way malicious on his part, but to me, it doesn't matter. If your argument is Kyle Filipowski was trying to hurt Wake Forest fans, or if your argument is, well, Wake Forest fans didn't mean to hurt Kyle Filipowski, either way, both of those things indicate that the safety of the players and the students was not being held up to the standard it needed to be held up to. Whether that means banning court storms or not is a conversation that I think is going to have a lot of strong opinions on either side. Isaac, where are you at with that portion of this conversation and just kind of what we saw happen on Saturday?
Yeah, Andy, I think, the question as you're talking about that's going around right now is and Coach Shire said this, like, when are we going to finally ban court storms? And I get he's just kind of in the moment. He's going through that. But that is the national question all over today. I jumped on some national radio show this morning. That was the thing they wanted to talk about. Do we need to ban court storms? Andy, I love court storms. That's part of the beauty of college basketball. Tell me the last time you saw an NBA fan base flood the court because their team had such a raucous it's so unique and beautiful to what we do. So to me, should we ban court storms is the complete wrong question to ask. I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to talk about banning court storms. I want to talk about regulating them. And you said it perfectly when you said that actually they were kind of coming out like before the final whistle. That is the issue.
Yeah.
A lot of times what will happen in these moments, if the game allows for it, let's say it's a little bit of a blowout and there's no, the final play is not going to matter. What'll happen is the coach that's about to get stormed will pull his players off the court, or maybe even I've seen it where they put like all walk-ons out there and get all the starters off.
Yeah.
And then get off as quickly as they can. The problem here is that the game flow, the game script didn't allow for it, Andy, because while there was only, 1 point something seconds left,
Yeah.
Duke was only down 4. So if by some miracle Jared McCain hoists a 3 and is fouled and makes it, we're going to overtime, right?
Right.
So Coach Shire can't do that in this scenario. He's got to have his dudes out there on the slim but still potential chance that Duke ties this game up.
Yeah.
And so that didn't allow for it. So to me, what has to happen is we've got to put some regulations in place to allow for court storms to happen in a healthy manner, in a timely manner that allows these teams to get off. Whether it's we put literal ropes around the student section until those guys are off. I don't know what it is. Maybe I don't know. Like, I don't want to have that conversation. I just want to say it's not about banning them. It's about fixing them.
Yeah, and I think I wish it was easier to be able to do that. And I think that's part of the issue. Is like Wake Forest, has said that they had policies, like protocols, they had procedures in place. And I think because of the perfect storm of, Duke players still being on the floor and in like basketball positions right as the buzzer ended. And obviously the protocols that they had in place didn't work. So that's clearly part of the issue. And I think ultimately, like, if you are going to have the banning conversation or the regulation conversation, you also need to have some kind of consequence conversation, because banning court storms and saying, hey, we're not going to do these anymore, it's not going to work. Students aren't going to say, well, the NCAA said we can't do like, that's not how it's going to happen. No. So you have to have some kind of consequence in place, and then also still tighten up your procedures. And I think about that from a team like Wake Forest, or a big, huge institution like in Michigan, schools like that, they can afford huge amounts of security. Right. If Pacific upsets Gonzaga, they're going to storm the court, and they don't have the security to prevent anything from happening. So that is part of this conversation as well.
Well, and here's the thing. Lots of conferences do have consequences in place in terms of fines. You know what conference doesn't?
The ACC.
The ACC doesn't have any specified fines in place. So that's an issue in this situation. You know what? Like, if you're trying to ban it, which again, I'm not, you know what you do? If you step on this court, you will be arrested and booked. And then you do it, that's it's gone, done. It's over. Now, again, that's not what I'm advocating, but
no, me neither.
As you're saying, if you want to curtail this, have those consequences and stand by them.
Having said that, if you were somebody who put your hands on Kyle Filipowski, you probably deserve some more significant consequences. And I suspect that Wake Forest is going to work hard to make that work. And
look, great job by the Duke managers and other players surrounding him quickly and getting him off. I was really proud of that quick work. Andy, though, look, thank goodness there actually was 40 minutes of phenomenal basketball beforehand, where Wake Forest, we think, has solidified their NCAA tournament, barring a, just ultimate letdown from here. Hunter Sallis was the story of the day, aside from one almost catastrophic hiccup on his part. Andy, how big was this win for the Demon Deacons?
Huge. Hunter Sallis has solidified himself as perhaps the best of that group of transfers that Steve Forbes has brought in with Tyree Appleby and Jake LaRavia and others, because Sallis has potentially brought this team to the NCAA tournament. 29 points in this game, 11 of 13. Isaac, he was 11 of 13, insane levels of efficiency for Sallis in this game, led them to a victory over Duke. To me, Wake is firmly in. They have a quad 3 game at Notre Dame left. They got a quad 3 game against Georgia Tech left. They absolutely have to win those 2 games unquestionably. Then they got 2 quad 1 games at Virginia Tech and versus Clemson. If they go 4-0 here, they're for sure in. If they go 3-1, I think they're probably in. 2-2, we'll see. We'll see what that
might lead up to the ACC tournament at that
point.
I
think at that point, then at least some level of how the results go in the ACC tournament will matter. But I think this team has done I think they're finally in a spot where they should feel pretty comfortable, assuming they take care of the business they need to take care of going forward. And it looks like they might break what is like an 11-year streak of not making, or they've made the tournament once in the last 10 years or so. This will be the first time under Coach Forbes. Well deserved. This program has worked really hard to get to this spot.
And Andy, what was odd to me is that while it looked like Wake Forest was going to win the game, and I mean that as opposed to Duke losing it, Duke uncharacteristically had multiple turnovers down the stretch, back-to-back even from Jeremy Roach. On the road at home, I don't care where you are, you can't have that from your senior leader in Jeremy Roach. Now, especially this is important because let's head up the road a little bit to Charlottesville, Virginia, where Duke's arch rival, North Carolina, was taking care of Virginia, causing the Cavs to have their third straight game of scoring under 50 points, which is an ACC record for the shot clock era of 3 straight games under 50 points, where these teams, Duke and North Carolina, had been tied atop the ACC coming into this game. It's now back to the Tar Heels having a 1-game lead with just 4 games to go for both teams. Andy, watching Virginia basketball is, I don't know what. There are so many things we could say about what is better than watching Virginia play basketball, but it works for the Cavs. But my goodness, their offense is so porously bad. They went for a stretch of the first half, 7 minutes and 50 seconds without a single point. Are we worried now about Virginia making the NCAA tournament? I know we're talking about the top of the ACC, but Virginia, man, this is not good for their hopes.
No, I mean, I think I would be worried. I think that they're going to start to kind of climb into that bubble conversation. They're 11-6 in the ACC. They have some pretty horrendous losses, not just in terms of like losses.
This was their best loss of the season.
Yeah, this is clearly their best loss of the season.
By only 10 points.
Closest margin of victory. They've been losing games by 20, 25. I think they lost to Virginia Tech by 37. Like when they lose really badly. And they have to, I mean, at this point, I think that they are in they're in a precarious spot. They have to, I don't know that they have to win out necessarily, but they cannot have any more ugly losses. They have to do well in the ACC tournament. Like this is a team that could find themselves outside the field on Selection Sunday.
Well, and if you're Virginia, and I tell you, hey, Virginia, it's halftime of this game, and RJ Davis and Armando Bacot have tied for 2 points, or collectively scored 2 points. Yeah. You got to feel good about that. Problem is, at halftime, Virginia 16, Cormac Ryan 15. That was the score. So that's going to do it. Great news for the Tar Heels. Bad day for Duke. Hopefully, dear goodness, hopefully Flip is okay and able to continue playing. That would be a stain on our sport. Andy, let's go from a game, Virginia and North Carolina, where the team scored a combined 98 points, to a game where college basketball's most confounding team reeled off 117 on their own. We'll do that in just a second. Right after I tell you this episode's brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with FanDuel on your first bet on it, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with things like this, Andy: quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. We're just about to talk about some SEC results. Here is the latest SEC regular season champion odds. Tennessee leads the way, plus 105, Bama plus 130, Auburn plus 430, steep cliff from there, South Carolina plus 4,800, Florida plus 8,500, and Kentucky plus 11,000. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on that action or others and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Andy, on Saturday, we had 2 ranked-on-ranked matchups. We'll get to Houston at Baylor here in just a minute. But first, we want to start inside Rupp Arena, where Kentucky, I started singing Katy Perry, Andy. You hot, then you're cold, you yes. Like, that's what I feel like this Wildcats team is, my dude. The number 17 Wildcats, 117-95 over number 13 Alabama. And Andy, on Friday, you, I think hyperbolically and in just whatever you want to say, said, is this first team to 110 wins? And Andy, you didn't go extreme enough, my dude. You needed to, it needed to be higher, because Kentucky scores 117 points, the most Kentucky has ever scored against an AP-ranked opponent. And Andy, let's just go right to this question, and we can talk about the game some, but I want to big picture this right out of the gate. What on earth do we make of this Kentucky team? Because we can talk about the back and forth of what they've done. I'll leave that to you to do here in just a second. I can't make heads or tails of them from one game to another. If you're a betting person, never bet on this team because you will lose. Andy, what do we do with Kentucky?
Yeah, what an incredible win for them, but what a confounding team, like you said. And I think we're looking at a team filled with freshmen, who is coached by a coach that is, let's say, inconsistent from an X's and O's perspective on the sideline. We'll go with inconsistent because some of the coaching game decisions that John Calipari makes seem to be to the detriment of the team and the personnel that they have. We have seen that for a long time. That's not brand new this year. That's something that has been a criticism of Coach Cal for a long time. But his continued ability to bring in high-level talent has kind of mitigated that. And this year's team, yes, they're freshman dominant, but they do have Antonio Reeves. Trey Mitchell, when he's healthy, is obviously a big veteran presence for them. But
again, yeah.
I think when he's out and when your team is even more reliant on young front court players, you just see inconsistencies. You see games where they don't defend anybody and they give up a bunch of points and they don't score enough. But you'll see games where Justin Edwards, who hasn't done anything for pretty much the entire season, has been arguably the most disappointing, top-ranked freshman in the country. And he comes out and has an incredible game, 28 points, 10 of 10 from the field, 4 of 4 from 3. He didn't miss a shot except for one free throw. An extraordinary game for Justin Edwards. But he hasn't been that at all this year. I mean, at any point, Rob Dillingham has had his moments and has had his kind of, disappearing acts as well. But Edwards has been mostly nothing until he has this huge game. So this team is really hard to pin down. Alabama's a very bad defensive team. That is not news. And I think for Edwards to take advantage, being a bigger guard, being a matchup that is difficult for Alabama, just from a personnel perspective to defend, I think his ability to take advantage of that was monumentally important for Kentucky, but it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence in me that they're just going to roll now. They beat Auburn and then they go out and lose to LSU. They beat, this is not this inconsistency for Kentucky has been throughout the year. So they're riding the high right now. The wave is really up after this huge win over Alabama, but I don't have any reason to believe that it won't come crashing down because that has been the story of the season so far for this team.
Yeah, Andy, the back and forth of this, you lose at LSU earlier in the week, and then you do this. You beat Auburn at Auburn last Saturday, but that's, there's that 3-game losing streak at Rupp. Andy, to me, here's where I'm at with Kentucky, and I want to say this very clearly and concisely. This is the most talented roster in America. I truly believe that can beat anyone on any day. And I mean, including UConn and Purdue and Houston. But can you trust this team for 6 straight games in the NCAA tournament? Can you trust it for even 4 games to make it to the Final Four? Based on everything we've seen from Kentucky, my answer is no.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I love that you mentioned UConn, Purdue, and Houston, because I think that's a really good transition into this really wild Houston-Baylor game in the Big 12. Houston wins 82-76 in overtime. And Isaac, this is the second time in the last month that Baylor has survived what would have been a game-winning buzzer beater against them because the team did not get the shot off in time. It happened against Iowa State on February 3rd. Baylor turned around and won that one in overtime. It happened in this game. Jamal Shead, it looked like he got it off in regulation. Game-winning three-pointer when the game was tied 69 apiece. Instead, they review it. Jamal Shead just didn't get that thing out of his hands.
I thought in real time he did, honestly.
Yeah, me too. And then it goes into overtime. And like we said, last time Baylor picked up the victory. This time, though, Houston put the clamps on him, ended up securing a win. And at this point, because Houston has won, because Houston beat the 11th ranked team in the country the same week that UConn lost to the 15th ranked team in the country, we have to have the conversation. Is Houston in the AP poll going to be the number 1 team in the country? And then the follow-up question, should they be at this point the number 1 team in the country? Because for a while, UConn and Purdue's resume was just a hair ahead of Houston's. But now when you compare them back to back to back, Isaac, they're pretty darn similar.
Andy, that's great. And I think it's 2 different conversations between the AP poll and the NCAA tournament seedings, because we know just how AP voters vote a little differently. Like, for example, we didn't think Houston should have been second this week, but they were right behind UConn. Now, UConn was a unanimous number 1, even with that blitzing loss at Creighton. What was that, Monday or Tuesday, whenever it was earlier this week? I still don't think that's enough to knock UConn from number 1. So I think it'll still be Houston too, but we'll see what happens. But I'm with you. The conversation about the number 1 overall is getting a lot more interesting between these 3 teams, Andy. I mean, you look at it, they all have 3 losses. The next closest Power 6 team, I looked this up in terms of loss column, is South Carolina with 5.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
No, anyway, that has nothing to do with this conversation other than that it's wacky.
Shout out the Gamecocks.
Right? So Houston, Purdue, UConn. How about this? Purdue and UConn are the only 2 teams in America with more than 7 quad 1 wins. They both have 9. Houston, along with, I think it's 4 other, it's like Wisconsin, North Carolina. I think anyway, there's like 4 teams that all have 7 tied with Houston. But outside of quad 1, none of these teams have any other losses. Yeah. They all, they're pretty comparable at wins and losses. And so, man, it is a legitimate conversation about who is the number 1 overall team. And it's going to make for a crazy fun final 3 weeks of the regular season plus conference. So 2 weeks of the regular season plus conference tournaments.
Yeah, finding a way to compare these resumes is really difficult. They're all top 5 teams at the net. They all have 3 losses. Like you said, all 3 of the losses for each of the teams are quad 1. Who has the best losses is kind of a difficult comparison. I think like Houston's losses are all road games in the Big 12. That's pretty good. Purdue's are all road games in the Big 10. Now the Ohio State loss is certainly the worst, I think, out of any of these on the list. UConn at Kansas, 2 really good losses in the Big East. At Seton Hall looked questionable at the time. It looks a lot better now. So these are really, really difficult resumes to compare. Purdue, I think, has the best wins, and I think that helps give them a slight edge. Tennessee, Alabama, Arizona are all really incredible, fantastic non-conference wins. They're all on neutral sites, but still really big wins for them. But yeah, the resumes between these 3 teams are, you can nitpick them to death, and they're all going to look really, really similar.
And that's the thing, is we have to nitpick them to death because of their similarity. If I were doing it today based on strength of those victories that you just talked about, I think I would go Purdue.
Yeah, me too. I think so too. Well, Isaac, Washington State, they got themselves a massive win over Arizona on Thursday night to sweep the Wildcats and take control of the Pac-12 standings. But they gave that lead right back up on Saturday with a loss to Arizona State. We're going to cover that and the rest of our Monday 6-pack coming up right after this. All right, Isaac, doing our 6-pack here on Monday, as we love to do here, and we've been kind of taking these 6-packs while we handle a couple of games per each section, just to kind of get through as much content as we possibly can. We're going to start with a trio of results in the Pac-12. Those of you who listen to Friday's show, we know that we have our jinx of the week. We said Arizona is going to beat Washington State on Thursday night as we recorded before that game was over. Of course, we have been correct in our jinxes 4 out of 5 times now. Washington State, of course, pulled off the victory there. But then they go ahead and lose at Arizona State 73-61. It snapped an 8-game winning streak for Kyle Smith and the Cougars. They're now a half game back from Arizona in the standings, lost the lead that they had there, in part because Arizona, well, they responded pretty well to their loss to Washington State. They went and won against Washington at home. 91-75 is the final score there. Caleb Love, phenomenal game from him, 28.7 boards and 5 assists. Meanwhile, Colorado crushes Utah. Isaac, they obliterated the Utes. Much needed win for Colorado. They're 9-7 in the Pac-12. Still, resume is still not great, but this one pushes Utah pretty firmly out of the at-large conversation and helps get those Buffs potentially back into that spot as well.
Andy, let's go to the SEC. I know we were just talking about Kentucky, but elsewhere, Texas A&M really needed a victory in Knoxville at Tennessee. And talk about beatdowns. 86-51, the Vols win this thing, Andy. And so now you look at it, and with Tennessee's win, Alabama's loss, we've got 3 couplets at the top of the SEC standings. Tennessee, Bama tied at 11-3. Auburn and South Carolina tied at 10-4. And then Florida, Kentucky at 9-5. Andy, listen to Tennessee's closing stretch of the regular season versus Auburn, at Bama, at that South Carolina team we just talked about, and then home against Kentucky to wrap up the regular season. If the Vols win this thing, they will have certainly earned it. Elsewhere, I just mentioned Auburn being tied. They beat Georgia by 21. South Carolina beat Ole Miss. And, already talked about Auburn and South Carolina being tied at 10-4. And, Arkansas has not been great this year. Mizzou looked for a little bit like they might get that first SEC win, but Khalif Battle dropped 42 points on the Tigers. Andy, that's absurd. I think I saw, and somebody tell me if I'm wrong. I thought I saw this was the highest scoring game by an SEC player in conference play this season.
I think that is true. Yes. I think it's the 7th highest scoring game in Arkansas history. I know that, but I don't think Connect's dropped 40. So I'm guessing Battle probably has the record there.
Yeah, that's wild that Connect doesn't have the highest score. Wild.
Yeah, that is wild. Moving to the Big 12, got 4 quick games to talk about here. We also got some bubble results we'll get to at the end of the show. Kansas takes care of business against Texas at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. 19-point victory for them. They're up 20 at halftime. Never let that game get really any closer than that. No Kevin McCullar for the Jayhawks, but their 5 starters still all had 13-plus points because Nick Timberlake stepped in, had 13 and 3. Johnny Furphy stepped up with 16 and 8. Texas down to 41 in the net. Interested to see what that does for their at-large consideration. Iowa State beat West Virginia. We're not surprised by that. Taman Lipsey, 14 and 6 for him. Meanwhile, Kansas State upsets BYU. BYU gets that big win over Baylor and then tosses it away with a loss here to the Wildcats. BYU only 6 of 20 from 3. Arthur Kaluma, meanwhile, 28 and 10 for the Wildcats. And then Texas Tech falls to an unranked Central Florida team. This is a rough loss for the Red Raiders. Likely kicks them out of the top 25. Frankly, starts to get them into that bubble conversation. They're still 8 and 6 in the Big 12, still probably on the right side at this point, but this is the kind of loss you really can't take if you're trying to fight for a bubble spot in the NCAA tournament.
That's right. Let's go to the Big East. Creighton, just before we started recording, Andy loses at St. John's. Yeah. Apparently the Johnnies are laterally quick enough, despite what Rick Pitino says. Johnnies take this one 80-66, despite Trey Alexander's 31 points for the Blue Jays. Andy, stop me if you've heard this before. 0 points for Mason Miller, while the rest of the Blue Jays starters all score 9+. It's a tale as old as time. Seton Hall gets a big old fat bubble game win over Butler on Saturday. I believe that one was 76-64. Seton Hall now 11 and 5 in the Big East. Their net is 62, but they are 5 and 5 in quad one. Getting 5 Q1 wins feels pretty tourney worthy in our opinion. As for Butler, 63rd in the net, but just 3 and 11 in quad one. Andy, that might not do it. As expected, UConn handles Villanova with ease, 78-54. And we need to mention that we are recording before Xavier travels to Marquette on Sunday at 5 Eastern. So we'll see what happens there. As things stands now, UConn looks in great position to take the Big East. However, following Creighton's loss, they're a half game back of Seton Hall for 3rd place in the conference.
2 Mountain West teams lost games they really couldn't afford to lose as that conference looks to try to get 5 or 6 teams into the NCAA tournament. Colorado State fell on the road at UNLV. We talked about that as a possibility. The Rams 22nd at the AP poll. UNLV is a tough place to play. UNLV, I think, only lost by 2 at home. When Colorado State played them at home, they lose by 6 on the road to UNLV. Now they're 8 and 7 in the Mountain West. That's 7th place. Colorado State's in 7th place in the Mountain West. They're still a top 25 team. They were considered the favorite to win this conference coming into conference play. It has been a rough stretch for them. This is a resume killer. Not quite as devastating of a resume killer as New Mexico. However, they lost at home at the Pit. I've said on the show before, nobody beats New Mexico in the Pit. And yet Air Force comes into town, pulls off a 78-77 win.
You said that they flew into town?
They came into town is what I said, but yes, that is more appropriate. 2 and 12 now in the Mountain West for Air Force. 2 and 12. This is their 2nd conference win, and they do it at New Mexico. Really tough for the Lobos. They are now 9 Lobos. I have that right. I always mix those two up. They're now 9 and 6 in the Mountain West. They're still 26th in the net, though, so they're in a good spot there. Meanwhile, San Diego State obliterates Fresno State 73-41. San Diego State had 42 first half points. Literally didn't even need to score in the second half to still pull off a victory there. Really nice win for the Aztecs.
Dude, that's wild. Hey, I tell you what, we'll just not score. That's wild. I got several bubbly results for you. Let's start in the Big 12, where we had the last basketball version of Bedlam for quite some time. Oklahoma wins by 2 at Oklahoma State, 84-82 in OT. I mean, we had a 3 just over on the sideline. Great stuff for Oklahoma, who frankly really needed this win. Oklahoma State, though, has been racking up a couple wins, just couldn't get this one. Sooners 19-8, overall 7-7 in the Big 12. Soares had game high 20 off the bench for Oklahoma. TCU wins at home 75-57 over Cincinnati. Cincinnati's tournament hopes continue to fade, while TCU's, could very much be in play. Massive opportunity tonight, I'll tell you about in just a second. 17 turnovers for Cincinnati. That ain't going to do it. Clemson continues to solidify their NCAA tournament bid, beating Florida State 74-63. Joe Girard, 24 points, a perfect 10 of 10 from the free throw line. Tigers are up to 24th in the net, Andy. Interesting stuff there. South Florida, go ahead and chalk it up, man. These dudes are going to win the American, Andy. Beat SMU on Sunday, 79-68, 13 straight for the Bulls. How on earth is Amir Abdur-Rahim not on that final 15 list for the top? I am still appalled by that. Andy, let's go to the West Coast Conference, where at various points this season, neither Gonzaga nor St. Mary's felt like they would have any at-large hopes, but now they both do, I think. So even on Saturday, St. Mary's beats San Diego, still undefeated in West Coast play. Gonzaga gets revenge, beating Santa Clara. Great stuff for both of these teams. They play each other this coming Saturday. Critical West Coast Conference game. Both have road games midweek before they get there. Whoever wins this conference tournament, the other will probably still be an at-large berth. Andy, we wait to see.
The big Monday, we got two fantastic games. I'm going to recap those for you because my guy, Mr. Shade here, is going to be in town in Chapel Hill as Miami comes to North Carolina. That's going to be a huge game there. Miami clearly not playing their best basketball, but still potentially a really dangerous game for North Carolina. And then Baylor at TCU. That's your other portion of Big Monday at 9 Eastern. The other one at 7 Eastern, as they have been. Two fantastic games. I'm looking forward to getting a recap of those on Tuesday.
Subscribe to the show on video and audio. Smash the like button if you're watching on YouTube so we know that you are here. As always, apologies to the lawyer family who needs no apologies as we record. Purdue's taking care of Michigan right now. Let's go Wildcats. Lots of Wildcats had great work this weekend. And until tomorrow, peace.